Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Glenn Wilson, and this is, I think, the fifth installment of a series of lectures on the evolutionary psychology of mating and dating. And the topic this evening is that of love. I've given it the catchy Cole Porter song title, What Is This Thing Called Love? Well, the wise old owl in Walt Disney's Bambi has a nice description of it here. Nearly everybody gets twitterpated in the springtime. You're walking along, minding your own business, looking neither to the left or the right, when all of a sudden you run into a pretty face. You begin to get weak in the knees, your head is in a whirl, and then you feel light as a feather. And before you know it, you're walking on air. You're knocked for a loop and completely lose your head. Now, most people will recognize that description of the state of being in love, and it is a cultural universal. There are some people who have argued that it's a uniquely Western concept. Some have even said that it dated from the medieval concept of courtly love. But as a phenomenon, it's recognized in all parts of the world, all cultures, and all times. What is different, perhaps, is that in most parts of the world it is not necessarily seen as tied closely with marriage. The two don't go together like a horse and carriage, as the Doris Day song goes. In fact, more likely, particularly in countries where marriages are mostly arranged, love is seen as an alien, disruptive force which threatens the concept of marriage. And there are some sociologists who claim that the true meaning of love is that it's the excuse used for moving from one marital state to another. That is, getting married if you're not already married, getting divorced in favor of somebody else if you are already married. So while love is universal, it is not necessarily seen as closely connected with marriage. Now, the symptoms of being in love are quite well recognized. Preoccupation with the lover, increased energy, euphoria, mood swings, up and down. The adrenaline symptoms, the pounding heart, the sweaty palms, sleeplessness, loss of appetite. That's why I call them symptoms, because some of them quite literally come across as minor forms of illness. Alteration of habits and dress, perhaps in an attempt to impress or maintain the relationship. Intrusive thoughts, and altogether a feeling that you have lost control of yourself, your emotions, and your behavior. The whole thing is experienced as involuntary. Some people get extremely possessive and jealous, whether or not they have good reason to be, and will experience separation anxiety. It will be believed that loss of the loved one would be catastrophic. And it has been pointed out that love is a much more powerful emotion than sexual desire, for example, because not too many people commit suicide as a result of sexual deprivation. But they do sometimes top themselves if they have lost a lover. Now, there have been experimental studies in the laboratory of the conditions that will generate or maintain love. One of them seems to be that if you get a couple of strangers, preferably of roughly equal attractiveness, to gaze into each other's eyes and to share intimate secrets with one another, this will actually generate some degree of love. They will come out feeling some degree of attraction for each other. And of course this will be especially so if there are other cues in the background that would favor such an interpretation. soft light, music, the sorts of things that you would have in a singles bar. And of course this is experimentally exactly the sort of thing that does take place in a singles bar. It has been discovered that virtually any kind of emotional arousal can feed into love, can facilitate it, exaggerate it. Possibly because the emotion that you're feeling is attributed to the presence of whoever happens to be around at the time that might seem that you would be romantically attracted to. Even fear can apparently be reclassified as love. A very famous experiment took place on this Capilano suspension bridge, where they had a female experimenter poised at the end, supposedly doing a survey and asking questions, personal questions. And one of the things they were most interested in was whether the individual being interviewed would seek to make a date with this attractive female experimenter. And there were various opportunities for him to chat her up and ask for her phone number. And there was a much greater tendency for men who had previously crossed the dangerous suspension bridge to chat up the female experimenter as against a control bridge of a nice, safe, stable concrete bridge. That was the key comparison. So the idea is that the feeling of fear is a kind of emotional arousal that has the capacity to promote or facilitate the impression that you are in love with whoever happens to be handy. And this principle of fear-inspired love has been applied by dating agencies in adrenaline dates. I was actually advising some of the fun fairs on this whole concept and connecting them with dating agencies. The idea is that if you get tossed about in a very dangerous ride, you come back onto safe ground, you're feeling all stirred up emotionally, and you're more likely to imagine that you are in love with that person, or it will kick-start what hopefully will be a genuine relationship with other things going for it. It's not a totally new idea. The Roman poet Ovid apparently recommended that a young man should take his lady to the Colosseum to watch Christians being torn apart by lions. The idea being that that would excite her and she would cling more closely to the chap that she was with. Actually, there are two forces. One is the idea of misattribution of emotional turmoil, calling it love because that seems like an appropriate label. The other possibility is the process of affiliation under anxiety. A Stanford psychologist called Stanley Schachter did a lot of experiments to show that when people are fearful, they tend to cling to each other socially and intimately. So that if you frighten them in some way, if they were in a waiting room preparing for an experiment which includes unpleasant electric shocks, they are much more likely to club together and become very firm friends. So affiliation under anxiety may be another process that's going on there that is conceivably distinguishable from misattribution. A number of studies have found that women wearing the color red are more attractive to men, that it's seen as a passionate color that will evoke sexual passions. And men wearing red are reciprocally more attractive to women because the red apparently signals status. It's the kind of color that soldiers used to wear, for example, before they invented camouflage. Now these effects are largely subliminal. Most people are not aware of the fact that they are going to be more turned on by a person who is wearing red than a control green or blue, for example. The probability is that they derive from arousal connections in nature. I mean, one fairly obvious one is the colour of blood. If people are bleeding, there's usually something pretty dramatic going on. Of course, the reddening of the primate backside is a signal for ovulation, and hence tends to be exciting. And it might be that the reddening of cheeks in the human instance, or reddening of the neck, is a sexual signal that in some way connects with the primate use of the colour red. So there are evolutionary origins to the connection between red and arousal excitement. Other studies have shown that if you arouse people sexually by showing them erotic images, then that will prime the experience of love, as measured by the willingness of people to self-disclose to others and to make sacrifices for a partner and to favour positive conflict resolution strategies. Now, the interesting thing about this study by Gilleth and colleagues was that the effect was more powerful if the sexual stimuli that were priming them were subliminal. That isn't actually an image they use, it's one I stole off the web, but it's the kind of thing that they did. With very little imagination, you might see something sexual in that photograph of 2 bottles of Heineken. I can't see it myself, but other people tell me that's the case. The reason why the subliminal stimuli might be more effective is that while they arouse sexual desires, they do not arouse the inhibitory processes, the attitudes like disgust and so on, that might prevent that sexual arousal occurring. At least that is the theoretical explanation of it. The Romeo and Juliet effect is the discovery that if parents try to interfere with a budding love relationship, or indeed there are any other obstacles, like different ethnic backgrounds perhaps, if the couple feel that the world is against them, it can paradoxically intensify their passion for each other. Now, partly it might derive from the same arousal effect that I've just been describing, or it might be a cognitive dissonance phenomenon, which is that if, despite all kinds of pressure against the relationship, you find you are still together, then you reason to yourself, I must be very deeply in love. It's the only way you could explain that. If I have ignored my parents and gone against all kinds of fought all kinds of other difficulties in this relationship, then I must be very deeply in love. That's called cognitive dissonance. It's a theory of attitude change, whereby we try to make our behavior consistent with our attitudes, and more interestingly, we will make our attitudes consistent with our behavior. The famous one being that smokers have ways of denying the likelihood that their habit will kill them. You know, my grandmother smoked all her life and she lived to 83 or something like that. You know, so they will argue. Now, here's a question that a lot of people ask. Does absence make the heart grow fonder? It does up to a point. Almost certainly there is an inverted U-shaped function between the two, that initially your heart will grow fonder, but ultimately it will be a case of out of sight, out of mind. But the point at which that curve turns down depends upon whether you are an extrovert or an introvert. Introverts perseverate longer in all matters, and almost certainly in this area as well. Extroverts move on more quickly to the rival attractions. There also seem to be sex differences in this issue, in that if people have to go on work-related travel, The marital satisfaction of the men who are travelling is apparently enhanced, but that of the women, whether they are doing the travelling or they are the ones that are left at home, seems to diminish. Now, of course, there are different types of love and various classification systems to describe them. One of the first was that put up by a Canadian sociologist called John Lee, and he proposed a six-way typology based on three primary love styles and three compounds of the primary three. And he gave them fancy classical Greek names. He called one Eros. One of the primaries was called Eros, romantic, passionate love. Another of the primaries was Ludus, which is game-playing love. You've probably all played Ludo. Apparently that's what it means in Greek. It's play. Storge is friendship-based love. And then you've got some intermediate positions. Agape is selfless, altruistic sort of love, which Lee reckoned fell between Eros and Storge. Pragma is practical shopping list love, and Lee reckoned it was between the playful kind and the friendship-based love. And I think rather uncomfortably between Eros and Ludus is one called mania, which is possessive, independent love. The three primaries seem to make sense. The precise position of the intermediates is a little bit more arguable and difficult to defend, I suspect. That system is still used today. Measuring devices have been used for the typology, but probably more people use the Sternberg system now, which also identifies three major components of love. It's got a lot of overlap with the Lee system, but possibly has a better psychometric foundation to it. Sternberg's three primaries were called passion, intimacy, and commitment. Various other types of love fall between them. For example, romantic love draws upon intimacy and passion in the Sternberg system. Companionate love takes up intimacy and commitment. What he called fatuous love is a mixture of passion and commitment. There are positions right on the corner of the triangle, which mainly sort of elemental in a sense, if you like. If it's nothing but passion, he calls it infatuation. If it's nothing but intimacy, you might as well call it liking. And if it's commitment only, he called it empty love. But perhaps what you might think of as the ideal is the consummate love, which combines elements of all three components of love. But Sternberg reckoned that any particular relationship could be described in terms of the relative weighting of those three primary elements. Somebody else quickly discovered that, well, Garcia was one of them, that those three components tend to rise and fall in different phase sequences. Passion tends to occur powerfully at an early stage in a relationship, but tail off after about a year, perhaps at most. Intimacy rises a little more slowly and perhaps lasts a little bit longer. And commitment starts off very slowly, but has a better chance of lasting a lifetime. And while these were theoretical curves, empirical data has been collected that would support this system by a number of people. So there does seem to be some truth in it. Passionate love can begin extremely early in childhood. This is actual survey data, which shows that children you can't actually read those numbers, but I think that's about 6 down there at the bottom, are claiming to have experienced the symptoms of passionate love. The most striking thing about this particular graph is that boys in their early teens, particularly around the age of 11 and 12, are very loath to admit that they are in love or passionately in love. It is something that is vigorously denied by boys in the early teenage years. Otherwise, the sex differences are not very great at all. Helen Fisher is an anthropologist in America who has come up with a theory that, again, bears some connection with the Sternberg system and the fact that that the 3 components of love have different phases. She reckons that there are 3 separate evolutionary mating systems that can be identified in birds and mammals, apart from human beings. She called them lust, which is general sexual desire, and this is based particularly on the sex hormones, testosterone and estrogen. Then there is something that she calls attraction, which focuses your courtship efforts onto a particular individual that you have sorted out as being the one for you. And the third system she calls attachment, which is the instinct towards caretaking and overlaps with between the caretaking system for children and the bond between the adult pair. She reckons that each of these systems is associated with a particular neural circuitry, its own chemistry and its own behaviors. I mentioned that lust tends to relate to testosterone and estrogen. Attraction has rather different chemicals. They are often arousal and reward chemicals like norepinephrine, dopamine. Incidentally, it should be low serotonin. While serotonin might be involved, it is on the low side. That is, the lower the serotonin, the greater the attraction. And all of the adrenaline symptoms of the autonomic nervous system, the faster heart rate and breathing and skin conductance, all of that sort of thing also applies to attraction. So that is a state of euphoria and excitement, perhaps, that is determined by those chemicals. And the third system is based primarily on another pair of hormones, oxytocin and vasopressin, which is very closely related to oxytocin, but more applicable to males. Now, of course, there have been brain scan studies of the experience of love, particularly using fMRI, which is functional magnetic resonance imaging. That requires these great big clanking machines, which are apparently a little bit unpleasant. It's amazing that you can feel anything approximating to love inside one of these monsters. But nevertheless, it is detectable that if you get people in magnetic resonance imaging machinery and expose pictures of their loved one, then you'll find that certain parts of the brain are activated more than they would be if you were looking at somebody you knew but were not actually in love with. Perhaps even somebody that you liked, a friend, for example, but you're not actually in love with them. Now, the interesting thing was that these researchers, one of which was Fisher, incidentally, and let's see if I can get this. Yeah, there we are. Fisher and Aaron is quite a common associate of hers where it comes to MRI studies. they found that the areas typically activated were those of the reward system that runs under the center of the limbic system, really in the core of the brain there, the ventral tegmental area and the caudate area of the brain. And in fact, all the circuitry that is involved in the experience of reward and euphoria, that is what people get out of recreational drugs. Same sort of areas are the ones that tend to light up when viewing an image of your loved one. So it is a rewarding experience, in other words, to view your lover. And another comparison that is made is that viewing pictures of your lover will actually reduce the experience of pain. And you can observe the areas in the brain in which this is occurring. And again, they tend to be the reward centers. Other researchers in Britain, University College London, Zecchi and Bartels, have also been doing brain imaging studies of love-type experiences. And they found a number of interesting things. One is that while some areas of the brain are activated over and above viewing a friend, there are others that are inhibited, that are deactivated. Their activity is less. And that is just about as interesting as the areas that show higher levels of activation, because they tend to be in the areas of the brain that are concerned with restraint and moral reasoning. They would suggest that you become, that the world and your responsibilities tend to fade away during the experience of love. Other interesting things about the Zecchi and Bartels research, they showed that the brain areas activated and deactivated are much the same for men and for women, and they're much the same for gay and straight people. So it doesn't matter who you are or what your preference is, you will show the same pattern of activation and deactivation when viewing a picture of the person with whom you are in love. The other thing Zecchi and Bartels found was that mother love, a tricky little device this, maternal bonds and romantic bonds show the same patterns of activation and deactivation, as though there is a lot in common between them. And we will mention that again shortly. Because indeed the bonding of lovers appears to derive from parent-child attachments to some extent. Similar hormones are involved in this bonding, particularly oxytocin, which of course is a chemical that is best known for its role in promoting childbirth and lactation in women. But it also is secreted to greater levels during sexual arousal and orgasm in both men and women, and seems to promote a bond between the adults, apart from the bond that takes place between the parent and the child. There are various other ways in which one can make comparisons between lovers and parent-child bonds. That is, they tend to use the same sort of terms of endearment. They call each other baby and cutie and so on, and they hold hands, which is a parent-child kind of thing to do. Kissing is interesting because it's been suggested that it may derive from the mouth-to-mouth feeding of the mother to the infant. That is not just a bird phenomenon. It has occurred in human societies and is still seen in some tribal cultures. Of course, it's well known that oxytocin rises in childbirth, as I say, but it's recently been recognized that new fathers have increased secretions of oxytocin as well, which might facilitate their capacity to bond with their infant. Interestingly, men also have an increase in secretion of prolactin, which is the nursing hormone, suggesting that some of the bonding chemistry between females and males is more similar than we might have previously supposed. There are some other chemicals that are involved. As I say, research in Italy has shown that lovers tend to have low serotonin levels, in some ways similar to those observed in obsessional compulsive disordered patients, as though love is a kind of obsession, in which case it could be treated with Prozac, which is a serotonin-enhancing drug. You're probably familiar with Oscar Wilde said that love is a temporary insanity curable by marriage. It may also be a temporary insanity curable by Prozac, though I don't know that it's been used too often. But apparently if you are on Prozac, it might interfere with your capacity to fall in love in that sense of the term. It shouldn't affect your established bonds, but it might reduce the likelihood that you would fall in love with somebody new. The other chemical that's been associated with love is nerve growth factor in the blood, which seems to increase in early stage lovers. It's a short-lived connection. It seems to have disappeared in about a year's time. The researchers came back to the same subjects a year or so later and found that their nerve growth factor levels had declined back to normal. It's not quite clear what the meaning of that might be, incidentally. Nerve growth factor is concerned with nerve regeneration and healing processes, and so it might account for some of the health benefits of being in love. Another chemical that has been implicated theoretically, a chap called Michael Leibovitz wrote a whole book about the chemistry of love, in which he introduced the idea that a particular chemical called phenylethylamine, which is normally mercifully abbreviated to PEA, might be the critical chemical involved in love. It's a neuromodulator that promotes the release of epinephrine and dopamine, which are characteristic arousal reward sort of chemicals that would produce the experience of euphoria and energy that lovers report. So being a sort of an endogenous amphetamine-like substance, Leibovitz supposed that that might be the key chemical in love. Now, it wasn't Leibovitz's fault, actually, but others observed that there were quite high levels of PEA in chocolate. And they came up with the idea that the reason people desire to eat chocolate is that and they will do this particularly when they're lonely and depressed, that it's a kind of self-treatment for feeling unloved. And that therefore chocolate ought to be considered as a love substitute. There's no really impressive evidence to support that theory, however, and somebody else pointed out that there's not only is there more PEA to be found in sausages and cheese than there is in chocolate, but virtually none of it gets into the brain anyway. It's all disposed of in the gut at a much earlier stage before the brain gets a chance. So the chocolate theory of love doesn't have a lot going for it, I'm afraid. But I thought I'd better tell you that in case you asked. Other research, the The child psychologists like Bowlby and company established a number of attachment styles that they said were established by early childhood experience. They would describe children as being securely attached or anxiously attached. There is avoidant and dismissing attachment. I think dismissing is the kind where if a parent has left you for a while, you refuse to acknowledge their existence when they come back. Cats will do this. You go away on holiday for a couple of weeks, your cat will behave as though it hasn't even noticed you when you come back, and that's very hurtful. That's exactly what the cat intends, of course. But children will do the same thing. The idea is that attachment styles learned in infancy can be re-aroused, reactivated by experiences of separation, divorce, widowhood being significant ones in adulthood. So according to whether you are securely attached, anxiously attached, and so on, these adult experiences will affect you rather differently. One way in which early experience of the parent certainly seems to make a difference is that we are primed to find certain partners attractive according to the image, particularly of the opposite sex parent, as we observe them at a very early age. And this might account for certain experiences like love at first sight. You spot somebody at a distance and you're in love with them immediately. Another one that's been quite well documented is so-called genetic sexual attraction, whereby people who are close genetic relatives who were separated very early in life, when they meet again in adulthood, often feel a sort of a lightning bolt attraction to each other. And that might derive from common experiences of parental images. Now, love is an interesting and unusual phenomenon in the sense it's one of the few behavioral traits that doesn't show powerful genetic determination. As a matter of fact, a lot of studies fail to find any genetic influences at all. Certainly the highest anybody has ever got to is about 1/3 of the variance, which leaves a great deal of room for environmental factors, which can be shared family environment factors, or indeed random factors. That is that if you look at the environmental determination of reports of who you're falling in love with, at least half of that seems to be random. That is, it is not shared with other family members. It seems to be things like just being at the right time at the right place, the right time at the right place. Right place at the right time, I think would have made more sense, wouldn't it? Never mind. You get the general idea. So there is a powerful accidental factor operating in who you fall in love with. And if you have an identical twin, the person you fall in love with may not actually resemble your twin's choice very, very closely. It's often said that love is blind. Well, how blind is it? The research of Bartels and Zecchi showed that certain areas of the brain are damped, and they are areas concerned with negative social judgments and moral control. Now that seems to imply that there is a kind of moral blindness that comes out of being in love. I talked about the experience of being out of control, of the thing being involuntary, and people do things that will jeopardize a marriage and family back at home because of this experience of being in love. So that is a form of blindness, if you like. There are many studies to demonstrate that people idealize the person that they're in love with as well, particularly as compared with exes, previous lovers. people that you might have been in love with just as powerfully at an earlier stage in your own history, you now despise them, but the new lover has got everything going for them. Sometimes called the rose-tinted spectacles effect, and it's been pointed out that this will actually support an attachment. It will make the relationship happier and make it last longer. So there's a sense in which it might be seen to have a positive evolutionary meaning behind it. Or just one other study showed that people who were themselves in love were less accurate in identifying which other people were in love based on body language cues. They thought they were better at doing it, but that is, they had great confidence in their ability to do this, but in fact were less accurate than people who were not themselves in love. Is it possible to love more than one person at a time? Well, you can certainly try. Probably the answer to this, again, is a bit of yes and no, like the absence makes the heart grow fonder. You probably cannot love more than one person in the consummate sense that Sternberg was talking about, but there are other senses in which you probably can. Obviously, parents will bond fairly equally with more than one child, so that insofar as that bonding mechanism is involved in adult love, it must surely be possible to bond with more than one other adult simultaneously. And you might also suppose that because the three systems identified by Fisher, the three evolutionary mating motivational systems, are independent one from another, then you ought to be able to feel bonded to one person, attracted to another, and lust towards one or more others all at the same time, because those systems have some degree of independence. Here's a nice almost philosophical idea that some theorists have come up with. They argue that love is a quest to expand our sense of self by merging with another person, hence making ourself bigger. Couples talk about being an item. They talk about their other half or their better half, so that they are in some sense more complete or whole when they have merged with another person. There are experiments again to support the idea that lovers do merge, both in self-identity and the capacity to empathize with each other. You know, it's often said that identical twins have great empathy. Well, apparently lovers do as well. They get very good at anticipating each other's behavior, knowing what their intentions are and what they're going to do next, compared with people who are acquainted only as friends. And this is a thought of my own, that yearning for deep union with a partner might in fact be an extension of an evolutionary trend towards the ganging together of organisms that has into larger organisms. It's gone on since the days when single-cell animals became multicellular. That is an evolutionary tendency towards ganging together into larger and larger units. Of course, you see it in the creation of armies as well, that you can fight much more effectively if you've got a lot of other people on your side. So we're getting to the conclusions here, which is that romantic and passionate love is an extremely powerful emotion that most people experience at one time or another. Not necessarily in the springtime, but may well be the case. And it can lead to radical alterations in your lifestyle, your life arrangements. You can get married, you can get divorced, you can become a parent on the strength of love. Although, as I say, there are some sociologists who argue that love is the excuse you use for doing those, for making those changes. I think that's probably a bit cynical, personally. And the instincts, this is perhaps an interesting key finding, that the instincts which evolved to promote parental care have been co-opted within evolution to bond parents together long enough so that their offspring will reach viability. This is most obviously so in the case of humans, where the infants need a very long period of care from two parents rather than one. But might also be the case in other higher primates, that you will get parental bonding for the mutual raising of offspring. And that is good enough to keep the relationship together for a year or maybe up to 3 or 4 years in some estimates, beyond which we hope that companionate love will take over in order to preserve that relationship. It is certainly optimistic to expect that early stage passion, all of the adrenaline symptoms and so on, can be maintained indefinitely in a relationship or a marriage. That is most unlikely to occur, but other forms of love can cement a couple together for a very long period of time. Now, is it useful to study these mechanisms? I would say yes, because that way we get a better understanding of the agony that people experience as well as the ecstasy. And we also are in a position to better understand some of the deficits of love. People who can't feel love in quite the same way. Autistic people have difficulties with social bonding. And psychopaths, of course, seem to be incapable of empathizing with other people. But these are issues that I will be talking about in the next exciting installment next month. Thank you very much.